you have checked in with the checkers, so your votes will count this afternoon. There's always a purpose in the legislative process for having a little recess. And even moderators learn things or are reminded of things that they should and should not do during the recess. And I was reminded by none other than the venerable parliamentarian Robert T. Gannett that when you're in the committee of the whole, there cannot be a motion to cease debate. So that first motion to cease debate that we had was technically illegal. But as I said to him, the result was right because there was not 2/3 vote to sustain it. So we didn't really make a mistake. Now, as far as our proceedings this afternoon, we do have kind of a silent rule, and I'm just going to bring it up because I hope that we don't want to limit anybody's opportunity to speak, but we would remind people that we generally try to do it in frames of 2 minutes so that we can try to get this issue of pay-as-you-throw resolved. And unless there's any other announcements, there's been some movement, and I'm going to call on Sarah Edwards to make a proposal for your consideration to see if this might bring some solidarity to this meeting and maybe resolve the issue. Parliamentary inquiry? Yes, Mr. Burrell.
Since we now know that we're not allowed to cease debate, how then do we come out of a committee of the committees? Is it by majority vote?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Basically what will happen is, assuming that what is going to be presented is not going to bring it to finality, then we'll keep talking until everybody's said what they wanted to say, and then we'll take the vote. And it will then be a simple majority.
Okay. My question really is, will you entertain a motion to come out, to cease the committee of committees at any point in time?
No. It's my understanding that because of the nature of this committee, as we are now, you can't make that motion. I think we went through this last year, and I somehow forgot that portion. Better known as senior moment. Mrs. Sarah Edwards, the chair recognizes you for the purposes of making a discussional motion.
Okay, I'm sure Sarah Edwards, District 3, and I'm sure that this conversation continued through lunch. At least it did in the circles that I was traveling in. So a couple of the things that I heard through the civil discussion that we've had on this very complicated problem, that we recognize that there is a problem. I think that I'm maybe capturing this correctly, that we do care about our environment. We know that this problem is not going away, and that we care about the most vulnerable among us, however we define the most vulnerable, and that we also have budget concerns. So those are the items that I've picked out of the discussion. The rest of what I have to say isn't necessarily as nicely bulleted as that. When the budget comes up, I would like to make a proposal that we look at the Citizen Reserve account, that we make sure that anybody who needs bags can get a bag. So that comes out to about $150,000 to help this problem go through. And remember, this is the Citizens Review account. and that we hire the coordinator for 1 year and we begin to approach this issue as a pilot program so that we can get the information that we need to go forward with dealing with the problem of our trash. So when the budget item comes up, that's a proposal that I make. I have discussed it with a number of people, including most members of the Select Board that I could find, and they are thinking that this is a very good way to get us through this impasse. So I'm encouraging people based on this to vote yes on pay-as-you-throw for the 5 reasons that I named, and perhaps using this model.
Now, is there a second to that model? Second. Okay. Now, as I understand this, this would be a 2-part motion that would be incorporated into Article 9 when the budget comes up for full discussion, and then Part 2 would be incorporated into Article 14, which is the hiring of a recycle coordinator. And as I understand it, it would go in this fashion. Article 9 would be amended so that we would take $150,000 from the Citizens Reserve account and place that into the general fund for the distribution of 150,000 bags to Brattleboro citizens, not on a needs basis. So it would be basically the dollar bag for 150,000 people till the source is Yes, Sarah?
So that nobody has to self-identify. That doesn't mean that we're all going to go in and get free bags. We wanted to not create a new class of person who needs to go in. So if you feel you need a bag, you go get a bag. But that doesn't mean that all of us are going to be doing it. But what that is designed to do is to address the issue of low-income, elderly, and others so that they don't have to identify themselves that way, but they can be taken care of.
And then the second part of that would be that Article 14 be amended so that $40,000 would be taken from the Citizens Reserve account, which would be... Yes, Mr. Fallon?
Peter Fallon, District 3. I'm just asking a question. What is this Citizens Advisory Fund? Is that the undesignated fund, as in the budget, or can you explain what that is?
I'm going to ask Mr. DeGray, after I put the motion out, to explain the Citizens Advisory Fund, Mr. Fallon. That Article 14, the $20,000 be amended to $40,000 for a 1-year position. And I thought there was some additional, something about town employee or not a town employee? A private contract. Okay. Now, having said that, Mrs. Edwards, do you want to say anything further? Do you want to yield to Mr. DeGray? Okay. Mr. DeGray or Mr. DeGray?
Well, I'm going to let Barb speak first, and then I'll address you after Barb. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, it's our fund balance. It's not a representative reserve account. It's our fund balance, and that is the money that we have as of June 30th, 2009. By the audit that we have money. We've been building a fund balance, so we have a fund balance. What you're doing essentially is taking money out of savings and spending it. What you're approving if this would pass, but with the $150,000 plus the $40,000, so the $190 of fund balance, what you're approving is a deficit budget, okay? You're approving expenditures, but you have no revenue to offset that, so you're using your fund balance. I think it would be important for our auditing, for our auditors, because they'll go back and look at this. You'll notice that it's a separate article for the coordinator, and that's to show that our auditing, that we were authorized to deficit spend. So what we would want would be a motion that we'd be able to show the auditors that you were going to use $150,000 of fund balance to cover costs of bags. Because what you're doing is authorizing us to deficit spend. And we would want to show that we have the authority to deficit spend, because you guys are going to forget this by next year, and you'll be. So I think that's what I hope people understand.
Now,
It would still be a motion of the committee of the whole, but it wouldn't be, I'm not sure how that works.
Mr. Gray?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think what we're trying to do is figure out the clearest way for the auditors to see our action here today. Because several years ago, a lot of you who were here remember that one of the motions when we reserved fund balance wasn't recorded properly for some reason. I don't know all the particulars, and we had an issue with that. So if it is easier, then under Article 14, the total amount of money we would be taking out of the fund balance would be $190,000. And that would be allocated, as Sarah said, $150,000 for the purchase of bags, and then $40,000 for the coordinator. And I need to emphasize that this would be for 1 year, a pilot program. And that would certainly give us time. This would start in July, and I would suspect by the time the budget rolls around again next December, it seems like it's right around the door, that we would be looking at this and looking at how sustainable this will be, if this is going to work in our community. And so I think that this is a good compromise for all. The last thing that I will say is a couple of people, I had said this to a couple of people walking out to lunch, and we've heard about low-income people being affected by this. Well, people who live in apartment buildings of 5 or more, and low-income people who live in apartment buildings or are homeowners and don't generate trash, and those people in 5 apartment buildings of more, they're subsidizing trash pickup for a lot of us in here. They pay for the dumpster that their landlord provides, I would suspect, and they're paying for trash pickup for which they do not receive. And so we don't have a la carte tax bills. We have people who don't use the library. We have people who don't use a lot of the things, but that's community. We pay for things that some of us use or some of us don't use. That's part of the melting pot of community. So I think the idea of coming up with this money and not having an impact on the tax basis, because then we would go back to a level-funded tax increase on the budget, and those people would we would still have to go out and buy bags, but if you felt like you couldn't afford it, you could go down and get a bag. I think is a good solution here and a good first step. Doing nothing, I don't think, is a good idea for us. I think that we should try this, and let's move forward. Thank you.
Question now is on the proposal of amendment. Mr. Cooper.
Peter Cooper, District 1. I think the figure 150,000, if the objective is to subsidize low-income people or help low-income people get bags for free, whether they are self-identified or not, I think that is way, way too much money. And here's why I think that. $150,000, if we just talk about the smaller bag, would be 150,000 bags. If you just talk about 52 weeks in the year, they call it 50 weeks, you're basically providing one small bag per family or living unit for 3,000 people. Now, I heard something related to some legislation in Montpelier that had to do with rental housing yesterday on the radio, and they said that statewide, the units between 2 people and 4 people, leaving out the single-owner household, was 40% of the rental units statewide. I think we've got about 5,600 rental units across the board in Brattleboro. That's everything from 1 unit to above 5 and more. So if you take 20% of that, you wind up with 2,240 households. That has nothing to do with income. That's everybody. So I think we're providing $150,000, I think, provides way too many bags to address low-income people.
Mr. Moderator, may I address that?
Yes, Mr. DeGray.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
One of the things that I would tell you is that we're not just going to go out on July 1 and purchase $150,000 worth of bags. I think having that money there, and if it's not used, then it's going to go back into the fund balance. So we want to be able to make sure that we're there. So for us to go, and I appreciate what you're saying here, it's too much money, but I'd rather have too much money sitting there that's going to go towards the purchase of the bags, and we should be able to tell after the first quarter of how our bag supply is going to go, and then say, well, you know what, this only ended up costing us $50,000, and so we would put that money, we wouldn't expend that money, and so we would be okay. So rather than be short-sighted, I think it would be safe for us to go with this number that we have, and also to do it under Article 14.
Question is on the proposal of amendment. Ms. Hart.
I have a question. I thought Judith Davison came up with a great idea, and one that was very simple. Just everybody gets one bag or one trash barrel, and after that you pay. I have some experience working with low-income people, and with all due respect to everybody that works so hard to put this together, I think what you'll find is that they won't be coming in to get these bags. They just won't do it. And it'll be great, you know, from the aspect of it'll look like a great success, but I think it'll be a great success because it's not working and doing what you want it to do. So I would really like us to take 1 year and you do what Judith recommended. And then on the basis of that year, take our next step. And maybe that's fully implemented in the next year. But give us all a year to figure this out and get our hands around it, and for the people we represent to figure out how they're going to do this. So that's what I'd recommend.
Mr. Beatty.
There's a lot to say. I don't like this last proposal because I think that like was just stated, there won't be any outreach for it, and so it'll be a great success. It's a PR move. We have two basic issues here. One's an environmental issue, and one is a governance issue. And I believe that taxation should be progressive, and I believe that there's a legitimate role for government, and our government, our select board, is shirking that responsibility. What I need to hear from them, besides this last proposal, is that they are really going to work on a very large waste disposal problem in this town by implementing programs and by spending a lot of money in the short run to improve our situation in the long run. This is just still a cost shifting. So I still can't go for this idea. Thank you.
Question is on the proposal of amendment. Mr. Cox?
Douglas Cox, District 1. I think this has been a really interesting debate because it brings together things that we care very much about. I, for one, have a great deal of faith and trust in government to deal with social justice issues and also with efficiency, to be able to provide efficiently things that we all use, like health care, perhaps. And I understand the arguments and I appreciate them. I think that what we're, in the trash realm, we have a changing foundation. The costs and the effects economically, environmentally, and socially of the way in which we deal with trash have changed. We've had a system which I think has been progressive in Brattleboro that took into account that mix 10 or 20 years ago. Perhaps even longer ago than that, than we moved to the current system. I think things have changed. I think that what I hear in the initial proposal is an educational strategy that will help people understand the true cost, both economically, environmentally, and socially, of our trash stream. And I think it has a benefit of being relatively simple. It may not be entirely fair. It may not even be efficient. I mean, I don't think that there's going to be a savings to the town in dollars ultimately in going this way, but I think there's going to be a great benefit in our awareness of the problem and an incentive to take individual action, because we're dealing here with something that can't be solved by a public policy. It's not something that we can do. It's something that we deal with every day individually in our own private lives. So how do we set a system up that will help make that change? I think I appreciate the effort to try to make this more socially fair, more of a sense of justice given the economic inequalities that we have as a community. But I think that part of the benefit of the original system is that it does treat it treats all trash equally. And I think that if we start to dilute that, have too much complexity, then that message won't get there. Someone I think earlier talked about tough love. And I'm not sure that's quite the right system here. But I think that we're not talking about a lot of money. And I think that we do have to talk about a little bit of money that really touches everyone in order to make that change. I think we have an opportunity here. I'm happy to have the compromise done if that's what it means to go forward. But I think that keeping our outcome as simple as possible and as direct as possible is going to help us achieve our ends. So I'm in favor of pay as you throw in its original form.
Question is, shall you adopt the amended resolution? Mr. Davis?
Thank you for a chance to speak here. I'll be really quick. I wrote it down. I'm amazed at the socialist thinking when it comes to trash. We right now have a collectivist system. We all pay for everybody's trash except for the people living in large apartments. But anyway, I just don't think that's the same as a library, as a park. I think that this complex system of you can either buy the bags or not throws a monkey wrench into it. So I'm not sure I'm crazy about that. I don't think that continuing to pay for this unrestrained flow of trash is a social good. It's a social problem. And I think pay as you throw, in its simple form, not in the amended form, brings the value of that program to the forefront rather than diluting it. And I know people have said, if you're raising children, you won't be able to afford this. It costs a lot more than $1 or $2 a week to raise children. And it's not that much money. People rent, the amount of expenditures in modern life, I just don't think that's... there was a time in this country where some towns provided water free of not metered water supply, because everyone needs water. And those days are gone. Water is a cost. Disposing of trash is a cost. I think as soon as you offer free bags, it becomes, you can walk into the store and either buy the bags or not buy the bags. And I'm not sure we'll get a solution. What I would say is get 20 families, give them an incentive, like a roll of free bags, and if you do it, 20 very different families in Brattleboro, but to get the free bags and be part of the solution, you have to research your trash stream and provide that information to the public. It could be anonymous, but we need more data. I just think that offering free bags, I would rather vote the original pay-as-you-throw up or down than amend it and make it too complicated. Thank you.
Questions on the amendments? Point of order?
Mr. Chairman, Chuck Cummings, District 1. Can you amend an article that isn't before the House? We're in a committee of the whole. We're not acting under any article that I'm aware of, and I question whether or not your words of amending an article are proper.
Mr. Cummings, your choice of words is correct. My statement is incorrect. I just wanted to keep the focus on the amendment. Sometimes when I just talk generally, people really don't know what we're talking about. And what we're talking about is the proposal that Mrs. Edwards will make under each of those articles when we get to them, and we're trying to come to a sense of what this body wants. Right now, if I had to decide what this vote would be, I have no idea what this vote's going to be. And I've been keeping score up here of who's talking. And I'm afraid it's going to be, I'm going to have to decide it. So that's why I'm watching. Ms. Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Sherry Manning, District 1. I am in support of the original pay-as-you-throw. I did try to work on a solution for amendment to Article 14, and I was thinking it would be good to have a certain amount of bags available for free, but I certainly wasn't considering 150,000, and I think it gets too problematic figuring out now what's the right amount, except for just to give it back to the select board and say you come up with a certain amount. But also I need to correct some of my wording earlier when I was bringing the bags around. People were asking if the bags are biodegradable. They are technically not biodegradable. They have, if it's okay, I can either refer to Mr. Moody, if he's still here, or Jane Southworth, but they have 30% post-consumer waste in them, and it was a problem with the totally biodegradable bags because they were going to be that much more expensive. So, if that helps.
Questions on the proposal of Sarah Edwards? Mr. Webster.
Don Webster, District 3. I supported pay-as-you-throw the last time. This is the first year I've had many calls. I've had about 20 calls before this meeting, and I would say, as I expected, more than most of them were opposed to the pay-as-you-throw for sometimes good reasons, sometimes for inaccurate factual reasons. But there's no question about this. There's uncertainty and some angst in the community about this. And I'm afraid it was also enhanced in part by the way the issue was brought to us, where we were in a position of having to raise a budget in order to express opposition, and I think the compromise to get this going was the proper one. But it's still out there. I find Ms. Edwards, Mr. Gray's motion palatable. Number one, it is funded at least in terms of our surplus, although no one ever expressed exactly how much it was, but clearly it must be over $190,000. Is that correct? Yes. And so it will not have a tax impact this year. It would allow us to employ somebody who can perhaps bring this issue to the community. If 30 people here in this room are willing to take 20 people into their houses during the year and have a session where they can actually look at some of these issues, what the problems are, maybe you're going to start to get some answers from some folks or better understanding of all this. I'm afraid it's not time for the original proposal, even though I supported it originally last year. I think the community needs some healing on this issue and some discussion in a positive way. A coordinator will do that. The funds, which may be too many, but as Dick pointed out, doesn't have to be spent, is appropriate. It gets at the issue of equity. It gives us some time to sort things out again. And I think Mrs. Edwards' proposal is really worthy of consideration. Thank you.
Question is on the Edwards proposal. Mr. Fallon?
Peter Fallion, District 3. I, too, support Sarah's motion. I do want to give voice to what I think is something that I haven't heard anyone speak of today, and that is the need, at least in my view, that the town have a very clear solid waste policy that might extend 5 or 10 years into the future, that serious consideration starting today be given to all of these issues that all of representatives and others have given voice to, because they're all valid. Don is absolutely correct. There is a lot of angst around this issue. We, in a sense, we need time to heal, but we also need time to move forward. And we also need time to put in the time. And this is where I look to my leadership, and I'm looking at them now. I believe it is the Select Board's responsibility to ultimately, after such discussions as Don was alluding to, and others, takes place, moving forward, that the Select Board craft a policy that has some goals, so we have a direction, so we know where we're headed, so that future town meetings do not, so that we have a structure or some kind of framework in which we can make these decisions. Orion Barber's absolutely correct. There's no system in which we can make discussions and do what we all know has to be done. So my request to my Select Board is that you put solid waste management as a permanent fixture of your agenda, moving forward, starting with your next meeting, and that you at some point take up this matter of crafting for the town a policy that helps move us forward. Thank you.
Question is on the proposal of Ms. Edwards. Mr. Sprague.
This proposal does nothing different than the original proposal other than adding deficit spending. And for that reason, I can't support it. If it would do something toward reducing the waste stream or directing it in a more appropriate direction, I could support it. But simply, taking a balance that could be used to reduce the budget, I can't do it.
Question is on the proposal of Mrs. Edwards. Ms. Stefersky? Ms. Stefersky.
Susan Stefersky, District 2. It seems to me that in terms of the proposal, we're talking about spending almost 2/3 as much as our tipping fees normally cost. And what I would favor would be going ahead and hiring the coordinator as a full-time position and postponing any pay-as-you-throw for one more year to allow the coordinator to work within small communities, educationally, drawing people together so that people have a better idea of what's going on, and to encourage people to act more responsibly right now, because it might be possible to not even have to do this.
Question is, on the Edwards proposal, Mr. Harvey?
George Harvey, District 3. I spoke earlier saying that I would have to vote against the pay-as-you-throw as it was proposed. I have been contacted by a number of people who live in District 3. I don't know the exact number, but it might have been a dozen or more. All of them were opposed to the pay-as-you-throw proposal. Now, if I voted for that, I certainly wouldn't be voting as a representative of their views. This proposal, however, does address the things that they were upset about to a very large extent, and I can vote for this. I believe that we should be moving forward. As Mr. DeGray pointed out, we need to move ahead, really. And I think that this is a step that we can take that I can support, and I can face those people and tell them why. If you want to have pay-as-you-throw, I think supporting this is a good step toward getting that. And if you came here feeling opposed to pay-as-you-throw, I think this may address some of the issues that you have had, or that the people here have had, and I will vote for this, and if it is passed, will vote for pay-as-you-throw.
Questions on the proposal of Ms. Edwards? Ms. Edwards.
The word deficit might be a little confusing here, and it's my understanding, based on a quick survey I just took, that deficit means that the money comes out of the savings instead of raising it through taxes. That's what, in this case, deficit means.
Question is, shall you accept the proposal of Ms. Edwards? Yes. Mr. Georges? Yes.
George Herzog, District 1. For every year, we talk about the small amount of reserve we have, and we always feel we need a bit more to be comfortable. And I'm really opposed to taking money out of this reserve for whatever amount, for something that we can plan and that's not unforeseen.
Question is on the Edwards proposal. Mr. Sprite?
I want to thank my state rep for coming up with such an elegant proposal. That was basically what I was thinking. I think it solves a lot of the concerns that have been brought up. The good representative at the end of the aisle here has brought a letter from a constituent on the subject that she was hoping to read. I'm hoping to yield to her. Do you have it with you?
Mr. Sprite yields to Mrs. Wilson.
Yeah, I also have been contacted. I'm Katie Wilson, District 2, and I live on Clark Street, which I think has probably among the highest number of renters in comparison to homeowners, and I myself am a renter. I also am the single income in my family, so I think that I'm the kind of person that a lot of us have been talking about. And I am definitely for pay-as-you-throw as it is presented by Representative Edwards, or as it was initially put to this body. And I, too, received calls, both positive and negative, but I put a letter out on the table from a neighbor, totally unsolicited, that I thought really got in touch with what we're talking about here and who we're talking about here. She is a mother of 4. They live in an apartment. They have a single income, although it's a family of 6. And she is very much for pay-as-you-throw. And so I do hope that you all take a look at her letter. She's also been using Project Cow, which I know is not a full solution for the town, but at least a step forward. I kind of unexpected here, but I really hope that in making this decision, we're not just thinking about the impact today, but the impact down the line. And for me, that's really my reason for why I want to support pay-as-you-throw.
Questions on the proposal of Ms. Edwards? Mr. Cummings?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chuck Cummings, District 1. As long as the Board of Selectmen will consider making one of the assignments of duties of the coordinator to be certain that those elderly who cannot put the bags out on their own have the necessary assistance to do it, I certainly am in favor of Sarah's suggested amendment and would vote for it, and to vote for the article as it would be amended by that suggestion.
Okay. Questions on the Edwards amendment? Ms. Baboulas?
You wanted to address what was just said, so. Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. Why don't you go ahead, because you wanted to. Jesse wants to address what was just said, so.
Okay. Mr. Coram?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, thank you. Just to answer that question that Chuck Cummings raised, I'm not sure where that comes from, Chuck, because there's no change for those people. They would get their bags, they wouldn't put it in the bags that they have now, they'd get one of those bags, the blue or purple bags, and put it in that bag and have to get it from their house out to the street. I don't think we want to get into the provision of services, getting it from someone's house to the street. And I think it seems to me that's what you're directing the question to. Maybe I misunderstood, but that is what I understand you were talking about. So I couldn't support, if you want at least my view on it, I couldn't support that we're going to take care of getting the bag from inside the house to outside the house for the elderly.
Mr. Cummings, do you wish to answer that question, or?
I think Mr. Coram hears me well.
Mr. McCarty?
Scott McCarty, District 3. I'm going to make a motion that we end debate. Can't? All right. I'll shut up.
Question is on the proposal of Mr. Edwards. I got gentleman way in back.
Bill Penniman, District 3. Just along the lines that Mr. Cummings was talking about, I think the issue for the people who are unable to get the trash out is not the trash they're doing now, but if we want to recycle and compost, something the coordinator would work on is how to help them do that. They can't get out, they can't get to where the available facilities are. That's something the coordinator could work on. Thank you.
Okay. Questions on the proposal of Ms. Edwards? Yes, this young lady right here.
Sarah Page, District 2. I want to speak to the amendment. I have concerns. It's not clear to me where the incentive would be. It would have to require that this be enforced carefully, and I guess I doubt that that would happen. And so I look at the incentive, if everybody is given a free bag, the incentive to keep their trash, outgoing trash, to one bag makes a lot of sense to me, and it feels fair. So I would ask the Waste Committee, what, in terms of the $150,000 versus if we gave a free bag to each household, what are the cost differences there for outgoing trash, for costs up front?
Now, Ms. Page, do you want a member of the Waste Committee or the member of the administration? Or anyone who can
Whomever.
answer? Whomever. Mr. Gray, do you wish to?
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you for that question. My feeling under this proposal is that, listening to a couple of the concerns of the body, was that those in need who felt that they couldn't afford bags, or maybe even some who feel that they can afford them and just want a free bag, it would be a bag a week. It wouldn't be you go down there and get a handful of bags, and so you're right, what's the incentive to recycle? And if you feel that you need more than one bag, then you would end up paying for an additional bag if you thought that you might need it. But I think, like anything else, we have to have a first step. And we might fall down and scrape our knee. But if we can't get to the first step, because every time we start talking about it, somebody says, and what about this, and what about that? Now, Orion talked about batteries. I don't disagree with him in theory, but that's a point that we can get to. If we can't get to the point here of getting the bags and getting, then we're never going to get to the batteries for the hearing aids. I mean, let's face it. So I think that we have to go in small steps, and let's try this. We don't know if it'll work. We're trying to find a solution. There's a good possibility that we may be in here late into the night, and that's okay. If that's what it takes, that's fine. My time is your time. But the incentive at what we're thinking about is you get one bag if you feel there's people in here that aren't going to take any bags. I know that. And so if you feel like you need a bag, you go down and get it. And so that is the incentive, and we hope that you would recycle. And we start addressing some of the other issues that have been raised here today. And the Solid Waste Committee, who I think is really underappreciated, has done yeoman's work in the last year since this body met, trying to come up with a solution that we probably all can't agree on, but it's a first step for us to move on to step 2.
Ms. Page?
Thank you. So you answered half the question, which is, I think we don't know of that 150,000 bags, how much would be used, and I totally understand that. But could the other half, yeah.
Ms. Southworth, I think you might have the answer.
I have the answer. If you figure 5,000 households, which is plus or minus, but for a round number, if you figure 20 pounds is put out in a bag, it works out 20 pounds times 5,000 times 52 gives you the number of pounds divided by 2,000, gives you the number of tons, times 100, which is the tip fee, works you out to $260,000 is the cost if every free bag that everybody puts out is 20 pounds. If it's 30 pounds using the same method, it's $390,000. The tip fee per ton is 100. 5,000 households times one bag of, and since we pay by the ton, you have to figure how many pounds. I'm rounding. The census says there are 5,600 and change, and if you subtract out however many larger apartments there. The 5,000 is an estimate, so that's a ballpark number, but that's how I got to it.
Question is on the proposal of Edwards. Mr. Miller?
Roger Miller, District 3. Mr. Moderator, we entered into this discussion a couple of hours ago with your suggestion that you wanted to get a sense of the feeling of this group. And so with that in mind, I would make a motion, if it's appropriate, that this body express its desire to go forward with pay-as-you-throw, and we would take a vote, a non-binding vote at this time, and that's my motion.
Okay. Motion is made and seconded.
There's a motion on the floor, Mr. Moderator.
Yeah.
Point of order.
Yeah. Our parliamentary problem, Mr. Miller, is there is a motion on the floor, okay? And that motion is the two parts made by Mrs. Edwards, which basically talks about the money that would go and be put into the budget, and then the second part also talks the money that would be put into the budget to hire a coordinator. Then we were going to take the general vote of, do you want to accept pay-as-it-throws with the two amendments if they pass? So we've got to get to that position first, which is, are we going to accept the two amendments? And if we don't accept the two amendments, then we can go right to the general consensus upon, are you going to accept pay-as-you-throw? But we can't in any way get by the amendments until we vote on them. So, yes, Mr. Webster?
Don Webster, District 3. We can't call the question. And
That's
yet
right.
We're sitting here, and I sense a lot of people sort of have some feelings of where they want to go. A lot of folks who are sort of in the middle issue, at least, are modestly attracted to Mrs. Edwards' amendment. How can we get a vote on the amendment on the floor right now without calling the question?
Very simple. Everybody remains silent. I'll call the question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, the question before us is two-part. The proposal is that we amend. Actually, we're going to just, Ms. Boubulis?
Just to speak to the amendment, you're still asking people to identify themselves as being low income. They still have to come down to the town hall and they have to say, I need a bag. And, you know, if someone wants to, I mean, we've had a lot of proposals that have come up today, and I just don't like the idea of trying to make a decision on things this quickly, because there's a lot of ideas that have been thrown around. And I don't like the idea of just doing this on the fly. But the issue of the bags and putting the $150,000 in there, it may address the concerns of people in this room, but you still have a class of people that are, you know, that are being treated differently, and that shouldn't be the way we go. We should be, at least if we're thinking about giving people one free bag, you know, at least that's fair.
Okay. I take it that the sense at this point is not to take a vote on the amendments. I got 3 hands up, and I think what I'm going to do is take a 5-minute recess. I'm going to ask the town attorney to come over. At this time, we're going to try to resolve the issues before us and there'll be a motion made by Mrs. Edwards to withdraw her two proposals of amendment. So we can get to the main question, which is, shall you adopt the pay-as-you-throw system? That will be subject to your understanding, if you voted yes, that Mrs. Edwards will then put her two proposals on the floor in connection with Article 9, which is the big budget, and or Article 14, which is the hiring of a recycle coordinator. So keep that in mind. I'm going to call on Mrs. Edwards.
Is it on? Okay. That was meant to be a point of discussion, and somehow it turned into an amendment at this time. So what we were doing was getting ready for something in the future, and that's why they're being withdrawn. So at this time, I will withdraw those two amendments, and we'll get back to them later.
Question is, shall you grant Ms. Edwards the opportunity to withdraw her two amendments? All those in favor, kindly rise, remain standing until counted, or raise your hand. Those opposed? There's no opposition. The amendments, or I'm sorry, the motions of discussion by Mrs. Edwards have been withdrawn. It comes to the recurring question, which is the sole issue now. Shall this body support the pay-as-you-throw system? All in favor, kindly rise and remain standing until counted, or raise your hand. And I need to have the checkers do the counting, please. Those opposed, kindly rise and remain standing or raise your hand until counted. Listen to the result of your vote. Those in favor, 82. Those opposed, 52. And the pay-as-you-throw program has been or will be adopted when we get to the next amendment, Article 9. To see how much money the town will raise, appropriate, and expend to defray... Yes, Mr. Franks? Yes. Mr. Franks moves that the committee as a whole be dissolved. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the committee as a whole is dissolved. Article 9. To see how much money the town will raise, appropriate, and expend to defray its expenses and liabilities. Chair recognizes Mr. DeGray.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the Select Board be authorized to raise, appropriate, and expend the sum not to exceed $13,880,811 in order to defray to the extent all general fund expenses for the period of July 1, 2010 through June 30th, 2011, including highway and Windham County taxes, and the Select Board be authorized to expend in addition any sum authorized for a special purpose under any article contained in the warning for this or any other meeting, and interest at a rate of 1% per month be charged from the due date of payment on any overdue payment of town tax, installments, or portion thereof, and that the town taxes assessed on the grand list as of April 1, 2010, shall be due and payable in 4 equal installments, payable to the town treasurer until overdue, then to the collector of taxes, and that such payments of the installments shall be made on or before 5 p.m. August 16, 2010, November 15, 2010, February 15, 2011, and May 16, 2011.
Is there a second? Motion's been made and seconded that the Select Board be authorized to raise, appropriate, and expend the sum not to exceed $13,880,000 and $811 in order to defray to that extent all general fund expenses for the period of July 1, 2010 through June 30, 2011, including all highway and Windham County taxes, and the Select Board shall be authorized to expend in addition any sums authorized for special use purposes under any article contained in this warning or any other special meeting. And then the interest charge if you're overdoing your taxes, and the tax proration follows. Chair recognizes Mr. DeGray.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. What you have before you is a zero impact on taxes on the general fund budget. Part of the budget discussion here, they were long, and there is reduction in staff, as Barb will get into. One of the things at the informational meeting that we didn't talk to is that we took a full-time police officer out of the budget. It's not a reduction, but we took the position out that we were intending to hire. And I think that that's one of the positions that I had a lot of difficulty with, just because of the importance of policing our community. Look at what just happened a couple of days ago when they had the big drug bust in Windham County. So there are cuts and reductions in this budget that were very difficult for all of us to support, but at the end of the day, we felt that we heard the community saying that our taxes are too high, and we came in with a level funded budget. I also heard someone talk about the service of the library being reduced, those hours. And that's what happens when you get to looking at level funded budgets, is that something gets to go. And I have said for the last 15 years, every dollar and every budget has an advocate. Regardless of what it is, somebody is willing to speak for it and say, no, look someplace else, don't cut this. So I want to applaud my fellow board members for the hard work that they did and the time that they put into coming up with a budget that we believe is very responsible, and I'm going to turn it over to Barb.
Mr. DeGray yields to Ms. Sundag.
Thank you. When we first start the budget process, we look at revenue. You'll note here that there is revenue is pretty, is held pretty constant in all areas. The majority of our revenue obviously comes from the tax levy. As Dick said, that's been level funded for the FY11 year. You'll see some modest increases in some in some line items under the revenue section, but because of the last couple of years, as I said earlier, we've made increases in some of our user fees for our various programs in which we charge fees. We didn't feel it was prudent in this time to we tried to not increase fees, and we didn't do that. That made us, we then look at expenditures. One of the things that I want to point out is last year we did bonding for quite a few items. One of the more unusual ones, we did bond for, or note for paving of about $800,000. Going into this budget process, because of the increase in debt payments that will occur for the first time in FY11, you know, for the things we bonded. And this year, we went and actually, our debt service actually increased by about $200,000. So to try to level fund something when you're going in at a $200,000 negative, just because you've increased your debt service, and then you also have increases in other lines that you tend not to have as much control over. I don't think there is a line in this budget we don't have some control over, and I don't think it's honest to say we don't. But it made the process more difficult. We had things that worked in our favor. We had actually, our health insurance is a calendar year process, so we know what the first 6 months of FY11 are going to be, and we actually had no increase in our health insurance premiums with this year because we have a pretty good experience rate. We did have increases in some of the workers' comp and liability insurances that made it a little bit harder. What you get to when you really start looking at expenditures, sometimes they focus on cuts. I think what I'd like to say is that we focused on increasing efficiencies. And increasing efficiencies in a manner that would not really negatively impact services to the citizens. So we have made some staffing changes. I think that we will continue to look at ways to increase efficiencies in our departments that will allow us to continue to make some reductions in our operating budget without, again, compromising the services that we provide. One of the things you'll note that we did not make any reductions in would be a lot of the line items that have to do with computerization, our geographical information system, and those types of programs that we've been investing more in the last maybe 2 years than we have previously, and I think those will continue to allow us to work and operate more efficiently and allow us to engage more efficiently with the citizens. Couple of weeks back, about a month ago, at a board meeting, we had a public kind of unveiling of our GIS system. It is available online for people to look at. It will allow, there's a lot of information in there that people beforehand would have to come into the town offices to get with regard to information on properties, tax information, that type of thing. And a lot of that's now going to be more readily available online. And we're working also, we continue to work with the firm that does our GIS system to put more of our forms and permits online, again trying to reduce the time that people have to spend coming into the office and the time that our the office staff have to spend helping people with the forms. We are looking, our next step is to look at how to take credit card payments on some of those permits and some of the other user fees so that we can continue to make it easier for people to register their kids for rec and park classes without having to bring the whole family to the to the Saturday morning enrollment, although Carol does love to see everybody on that one day a year. So I guess that's what I could talk in terms of what we have reduced. I think I would probably prefer to say that we're really looking at increasing efficiencies, and I would, every year as we refine our budgeting process, we get a little bit tighter, and we have to watch our money more closely. I am happy that we have had now, I think, 4th year in a row, we've had a surplus at the end of the year. Again, we don't try to get a surplus necessarily. Our budgets are typically level funded, but there have been, what we've been doing is, if there's money in a staffing line item and we have vacancies in that department, we no longer move money out of the staff line item to cover other things. So we really try to hold ourselves to the budgets that we put before you each year. With that, on page 58, there are items that's kind of just a brief overview. With regard to capital expenditures, I did bring the capital plan for you. It was on the table. I had it at the informational meeting as well. This year, modest infrastructure improvements in our capital. Everything with the exception of the improvements at the Memorial Living Park, which we will probably take a note out for. And then there are 2 items in here that are donations. One would be for the Phase 1 of the Route 30 or the West River Park development. The other would be the proposed development of a skate park, which would be by donations as well. Leaves us with, we're spending about $306,600 on other capital improvements. And then several years ago, when we started the 1% rooms and meals alcohol, when we were asked what we would use that for, we had indicated it would be capital, and that's really what we have been trying to use it for, are to offset some of those capitals. With that, I think that we've made the print small enough this year that I don't anticipate a lot of questions, but if you would have any, I'd be happy to entertain those.
Question is, shall you adopt Article 9 as recommended by Mr. DeGray? Ms. Ufer?
Hello. Thank you. Kathy Erford, District 1. Barb, I just had a couple of questions, or maybe for John. And they're just revenue questions. One, the debt, could you just explain the debt proceeds? Because there's a big change in the budget, and I'm not sure how that works as a revenue item. And I'll just ask all 3 questions, and then you can address them all. So that's one. And I was just wondering where the parking ticket revenue actually shows up, because it's not on here. And then the other was the under town manager revenue donations, $350,000. If you could just explain that, what that is, which I'm...
Okay, debt service. Each year, you'll note that this year our debt service proceeds are what we are projecting is $175,000. That would be to offset the expense if this article question of the improvements at Memorial Park are approved. That's the $170,000. So that is the note when we would proceeds for the note. Last year, you'll see we had about 1.8, almost 1.9 million in notes and bonds. The 800,000 of that was the paving. 740,000 were various capital improvements, and then the lease proceeds tend to be we lease vehicles with the exception of our police cars, and so that's why you can see this year that line, the debt proceeds. department. That will fluctuate depending on how much borrowing we're proposing to do with each year. This year, we're doing less, obviously. Next year, what I believe you'll see in the financial reports is that we'll be actually taking debt service out of this and showing it as a separate, showing it separately as both expenditures and revenue. And what that will allow then is to see, you'll see less fluctuation from year to year, because you'll note that, you know, last year, if you look at the FY10 budget, the total revenue is about 14.367. This year, or 15.367. This year, it's 14.283. The majority of that has to do with the reduction in the note proceeds, or in the bonds. Then you asked about the parking tickets. The parking system is an enterprise fund. It's a business-like fund. It doesn't. That report doesn't come to this body. This body is responsible for the general fund, and so the parking ticket revenue goes into that fund. So that's a separate fund, like our utilities budget is also an enterprise fund, and that's a separate fund. You do periodically take up items from those funds, and that's when we're doing bonding, because neither the parking nor the utilities really, we're not at a place yet where we can do revenue-based bonding for those. We do general obligation bonds. And because general obligation bonds are the obligation of the town and the general fund, those items sometimes come before the town meeting. And then with regard to the town manager, that first line item, $350,000, that is to offset those are actually those are donations. It's $150,000 donations for the skateboard park and $200,000 donations for the projected for the West River Park Phase 1 development. And so because we have those in expenditures, again, we're showing it in our revenue as offsetting revenue. Just to let you know that this budget that you put, there's a couple ways you could always show your budget, and one is to keep article questions out, or the way we've chosen to do it is every article question is actually reflected in this budget right now, and we do that way mainly because the one article question that always kind of throws us a little bit is human services. It's $130,000. If you don't show it in here, it looks like you're $130,000 less than what we, so when you're trying to compare year to year, we tend to try to keep things all in here. The actual motion before you for the $13 million is the total amount of revenue minus those article questions. Okay, so those we're not double counting those, but we have chosen to show the projected or the proposed budget to you as it would look if everything passed.
Question is on Article 9, Mr. Valenti.
Mr. Moderator, would I be out of order if I made a motion to amend at this time?
No, okay. You may.
I hate to be very unpopular here, and I want to be clear, I'm doing this to preserve the issue for referendum of pay-as-you-throw, and I would ask anyone at least that supports me to not talk, because I'm aware that this issue's been belabored considerably. I move to amend the proposed budget by adding $328,000 to the revenue raised by taxes for the purpose of maintaining trash pickup in its current state, and to remove from the budget the line item representing $328,000 revenue from the side of from sale of special pay-as-you-throw bags. The purpose of this amendment being to continue normal trash pickup and to avoid a pay-as-you-throw system. And I will not request to speak anymore on that motion.
Point of order, Mr. Moderator.
I'm sorry. Mr. DeGray?
Yes. The pay-as-you-throw, the $328,000, regardless of which way the vote went is in the budget. So if pay-as-you-throw didn't pass its vote, then then our taxes would have increased, and if you look up under current taxes where it says $11,610.357, that number would have jumped by $328,000. And so, instead of being a zero impact on the taxpayers, it would have roughly equated out to a 2.8% increase in the tax levy. So the number would stay the same, the 13,811. So I'm going to let Barb talk a little bit further on this.
I believe the point of order would be that I don't believe the town meeting representatives can do the line item recommendation. I mean, you can do it as an advisory, but I'm not sure if that can be part of the motion of removing line items.
Do you have the 209 book? Oh, here it is. Is that on page 59?
It's on page 59. Mr. Valenti can make a motion to reduce the budget by $328,000 or increase it by whatever, $328,000. But any votes that are taken by the body addressing specific line items are advisory only, and the board is not compelled to follow the vote of the body. So you can talk about certainly specific line items and you can make motions, but at the end of the day, the board is certainly compelled to do what it feels it does. And I would say that 99.9% of the time it does follow the body's wishes, but it's not compelled to.
Okay, I think what we're going to do, take 5 minutes. I want Mr. Fisher to come up and Mr. Valenti, and I think Mr. Burrill. Take 5-minute recess. The meeting will come to order. Mr. Valenti has moved to amend the proposed budget by adding $328,000 to the revenue raised by taxes for the purpose of maintaining trash pickup in its current state. The purpose of this amendment being to continue normal trash pickup and to avoid changing to the pay-as-you-throw system. The amendment has been seconded according to the town clerk, and Mr. Valenti, you may have the floor.
I'm sorry to talk about this anymore. I think Sarah's compromise is good, but the fact is we had a year to prepare for this. 4 days prior to the town meeting, we decided to go to the Committee of the Whole. 4 hours after being in the Committee of the Whole, we realized we might not be able to get out of it. And I think that reflected some poor planning in and of itself. And I mean, coming up with a solution for a problem we've known that this committee was dissatisfied with for the past year, not from the Waste Committee, not from the Select Board, but over lunch, after 2 hours of debate. I'm sorry, but I don't think that that type of planning is responsive to the people that we represent. And I'm making this, this motion fully understanding that it will be voted down. And my goal is to preserve the issue for the possible petition and referendum by the townspeople, who I think may not feel the same as the body on this. And a fellow named Moss Kaler, I think, will be doing a petition after town meeting. So thank you very much.
Question is, shall you amend Article 9 as recommended by Mr. Valenti? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, kindly rise and remain standing or raise your hand until counted. Oh, I'm sorry, I need the checkers to count, please. I just think it would be better. Those opposed, kindly rise and remain standing until counted. Or raise your hand. Does anyone wish to abstain? One. Okay. Listen to the result of your vote. Those in favor of the proposal amendment, 36. Those opposed, 87. And we had one abstention. The question is, shall you adopt Article 9 as recommended by Mr. DeGray? Yes, Town Manager Sundag.
I apologize. I didn't realize until it was pointed out to me at that break. If on page 62, towards the middle, is our human service funding. That did not get. If you notice at the bottom, it has the $130,252. We didn't normally, when we get to this point, we have that put out, distributed amongst the appropriate human services. We just put it in as a placeholder this time. So if you are actually, so the actual disbursement of that 130,200, and it'll actually be 60, is actually in the upcoming article on human services. And I apologize for that. It looks like the Family Garden's getting, according to this, $130,252. That's not the case. When we're doing our budget, we just plug in human services as a placeholder. And before this got printed, it just didn't get distributed out as the recommendation of the Human Services Committee. You'll note that when we get to that article, they'll actually be about $8 short, and because of the error, I'm taking $8 out of one of my line items and giving it to Human Services.
Question is, shall you adopt Article 9 as recommended by Mr. DeGray? Are you ready for that question? Mr. Chapman? Chris Chapman, please.
Thank you. Chris Chapman, District 1. I think it's appropriate at this point to offer an amendment to the budget in keeping with the vote we had after our hours of, is this not the time? Oh, never mind, I'm sorry, I'm going to just sit down and be quiet.
Okay. Okay. I think the answer, Mr. Chapman, is that request will be done under Article 14. We're going to tie both figures together. Okay. Yes, Ms. Turners?
I wanted to ask if, I know that if people refer to line items in the budget, they please tell us what page they're on. I know that the font is very small. It would be easier to find. Thank you.
Okay. Are you ready for the question of, shall you adopt Article 9? Ms. Boboulas.
Just a question, because if we bring the amendment that Sarah's talking about under Article 14, will be violating the practice, that agreed-upon practice that this body has made over the last several years, and that is that we'll abide by what the Human Services Committee does, and we're not going to add any more things in there. That's
I think, Ms. Baboulas, we're talking about Article 14. The Human Service is Article 13.
All right.
Question is, shall you adopt Article 9 as recommended by Mr. DeGray? Are you ready for that question? If, Mr. Martin.
I'm just about ready for the question. However, I want to commend the Select Board and the Town Manager in the methodology used with the various departments to really get the budget down where they had to be in the various departments, and appreciate that. I know there was like we get $113,647,000 saved in the Town Manager's report. As a crime prevention officer for 8 years of the state police, I have grave concern, as Mr. DeGray and the Town Manager has, with the crime that's going on in this community. And cutting that position completely out is not a good time to do that. I think as we stay in these tough times, crime is going to go up. And we're seeing some real serious violent crime in this community. And I don't know what the methodology is, but I'd like to see that position restored and fully funded. I don't know if it takes a motion. If so, that's my motion.
Mr. Martin, are you requesting any specific figure to be added to the budget? Because I think basically we would have to have a figure to be added, and it would be subject to at least comment from the administration.
Should the chief be interrogated on that?
If the chief is here, he could be interrogated if he desires to be.
Mr. Moderator, I might be able to answer that question as we're looking for a dollar amount. Roughly, it would be $40,000 for that position, which would include benefits. $44,000. So if you wanted to, I didn't bring my calculator, if you wanted to amend the budget upward by $44,000, I'm not sure where the grand total would move to.
And would that be a big effect on a $13, $14 million budget?
No. Town manager is interrogated.
If you broke down every department by a person, it wouldn't be a big effect on the budget. But we work with in the whole. I could say for every cut that was made, that individually wasn't a big impact on the budget. Collectively, it got us to where we're at, which would be a level funded budget.
Doing some quick gazintas, the budget would move to $13,924,811. If
Which
you
isn't much of an
chose
effect.
to.
Then is a motion in order?
If you wish to make the motion,
I would
you
make
can
a motion that we reinstitute $44,000 into the budget for the purpose of bringing that position back and filling it.
Motion has been seconded. Now, before I pose the question, do you still want the chief to make any comments? Chief Wren, you're interrogated if you would like to be.
I missed the question, I'm sorry. Was there a question?
Well, I think the question basically is, Mr. Martin has moved to increase the budget by $44,000 in order to hire a police officer whose job was in existence and apparently was taken out of the budget when it was proposed. He'd like to put it back in, and I think is looking for some justification from you.
Personally, I believe it's a great idea. The position that was eliminated was from a vacancy in our table of organization that deleted us or moved us down by one. I believe in the times we're looking at some retirements. We have one opening now, one officer at the academy. The next academy will not start until August, and then we'll have to wait until next January or February. We need to keep our ranks up high and filled. With the level of crime we're at now, it's a good idea to put that back into the budget.
Question is, shall you amend Article 9 by including an additional $44,000 for a police officer as recommended by Mr. Martin? Mr. Martin.
I won't belabor this either, but if I was a young man looking at getting into law enforcement, which Brattleboro PD was my first department I worked for, coming out of the Army, I'd look at a town and I'd see, are they filling their positions? Are they deleting positions? Would I want to apply if I know this last year that they did away with a position and I get a job and I may lose it next year because they'll do away with another position when somebody leaves? I really value putting this back in.
Question is on the amendment proposed by Mr. Martin. Are you ready for that question? Mrs. O'Connor?
This is very difficult. I certainly would like to agree with the chief. When we went through this budget, this is not the only position that we did not fill. I think we're going down a slippery slope right now. If we start, Steve Barrett is going to, I'm sure, be standing up. He would like that position filled. I believe we cut time in the Lister's office, and I think for the last 2 or 3 years, you folks need to remember, we have not had an assistant town manager, which we have all felt has been very important. We've had Barb Sundag doing the work of 3 or 4 people. We're thrilled with what she's doing. And as much as I would like to support putting this police position back in, I really think we all need to look at the budget that was presented as a whole with all the departments and not start saying we want this added, that added. And Terry, I respect you very much. I know your years there. I respect the chief. I know he would take as many people as possible. And we would like to put that position back in. When we discussed the budget this year, we said we would look again every year at these positions. But at this point, we're going to have a recycling coordinator or whatever, and I will support that. But please start looking at the town manager's office and others before we start putting more money into this. Thank you.
Question is, shall we amend the Article 9 as recommended by Mr. Martin? Mr. Sprite?
Rick Sprite, District 3. I'm not going to speak in favor or opposed to this, but I do want to point out that with what we're doing with the pay-as-you-throw, you have to realize that that $300 and some odd thousand didn't go away as the trash goes away. It just got shifted to a more diverse bunch of pockets that feed the tax budget, the budget that feeds these guys. So if you want to look at it apples to apples, you have to compare this year's budget with that 320, whatever, that 29,000 or whatever it is, on top of the budget they're presenting to us if you want to compare it to last year's budget. So it is already I don't know, I figured it approximately 4% increase if you count that in. And I think we need to count that in if we're really comparing two equal budgets with the same things in it. Thank you.
Question is on Article 9. Mr. Martin?
I talked to all the various department heads here in the town because I want to know about the methodology and the process used, and that's why I feel it was a very fair process, and they feel also it was a very fair process. And I think Steve and Jerry and the various heads of and Mike know that, I mean, sure they let the position in, but, and not that their department isn't any less essential department than any other department. But when you're looking at crime, and the increase of crime, the increase of violent crime, and the domestic situation that's going on in this town, law enforcement is an essential service. It always has been up there, especially as you're in the times that we live in. And I'd still stand on that.
Question is, shall you amend Article 9 by increasing the budget by $44,000? Are you ready for that question? If so, all in favor, kindly rise and remain standing until counted. Those opposed, kindly rise and remain standing until. Okay. The ayes have failed, so the amendment is not adopted. And the recurring question is, shall you raise and appropriate and expend the sum of $13,880,000 $13,880,811 as recommended by Mr. DeGray. Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. You may be seated. All those opposed by nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you've adopted Article 9.
Budget.
Article 10, to see if the town will authorize the Select Board to borrow money on its notes in anticipation of taxes, grants, and other revenues. Chair recognizes Mr. Coram.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the Select Board be authorized to borrow money on its notes in anticipation of taxes, grants, and other revenue.
Is there a second? Motion has been made and seconded that the Select Board be authorized to borrow money on its notes in anticipation of taxes, grants, and other revenue. Mr. Coram, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No.
Are you ready for the vote? All those in favor signify by standing. Those opposed signify by standing. The ayes have it, and you've adopted Article 10. Article 11, to see if the town will raise and appropriate a sum not to exceed $10,000 to assist in funding Brattleboro City for Climate Protection Campaign for fiscal year 2011, July 1, 2010 to June 30, 2011. Mrs. O'Connor.
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town raise and appropriate $10,000 to assist in funding Brattleboro's Cities for Climate Protection Campaign for fiscal year 2011.
Motion has been made and seconded that the town raise and appropriate $10,000 to assist in funding Brattleboro Cities for Climate Protection Campaign for fiscal year 2011. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The ayes do have it, and you've adopted Article 11. Article 12. To see if the town will raise and appropriate the sum of $76,000 through special assessments on properties within the Downtown Improvement District, as approved by the town meeting March 19, 2005, and as delineated in the town ordinance entitled Municipal Act to Establish and Regulate the Downtown Improvement District, to be used for capital and operating costs of projects of the town's duly designated downtown organization. Chair recognizes Mr. Pillsbury.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town raise and appropriate the sum of $76,000 through special assessments on properties within the Downtown Improvement District, as approved by town meeting March 19, 2005, and as delineated in the town ordinance entitled Municipal Act to Establish and Regulate the Downtown Improvement District, to be used for capital and operating costs of projects of the town's duly designated downtown organization.
Is there a second? Motion has been made and seconded that the town raise and appropriate the sum of $76,000 through special assessments on the properties within the Downtown Improvement District, as approved by town meeting and as delineated in the ordinance entitled Municipal Act to Establish and Regulate the Downtown Improvement District, to be used for capital and operating costs of projects of the town's duly designated downtown organization. Mr. Pillsbury, do you wish to make any comments?
No, Mr. Moderator.
Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor signify by, please stand. Those opposed, please stand. The ayes have it, and you've adopted Article 12. Article 13. To see if the town will raise and appropriate the sum of $130,260 to support human service programs and facilities providing services to the residents of Brattleboro, to be allocated in the following manner: AIDS Project, $1,800. Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity, $2,000. American Red Cross, $2,000. Boys and Girls Club, $8,000. Brattleboro Area Drop-In Center, $8,000. Brattleboro Area Hospice, $1,700. Brattleboro Housing Authority Summer Lunch, $4,500. Brattleboro Senior Meals, $6,500. Clark Canal Neighborhood Association, $4,100. Connecticut River Transit, $3,000. Council on Aging, $1,200. Family Garden, $1,000. Gathering Place, $2,700. Green Mountain RSVP, $980. Health Care and Rehabilitation Services, $7,500. Kids Place, $2,000. Morningside House, $5,000. Phoenix House, $3,000. Sevka, $7,000. Turning Point, $2,700. Vermont Association for Blind and Visually Impaired, $6,800. Vermont Association for Blind and Visually Impaired. Jeez. I was just looking for a little more to get my glasses. $680. Vermont Center for Deaf and Hard of Hearing, $2,500. Vermont Center for Independent Living, $1,200. Visiting Nurse Association, $38,000. Wyndham Child Care, $2,700. Wyndham County Reads, $1,500. Youth Services, $9,000. Chair recognizes Mr. Coram.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town raise and appropriate the sum of $130,260 to support human service programs and facilities providing services to the residents of Brattleboro to be allocated in the following manner. And that is, as so eloquently read by the moderator, from AIDS through youth services.
Is there a second? Motion has been made and seconded that you adopt Article 13 concerning the support of human service programs and facilities for the residents of the town. Mr. Coram, do you care to make any remarks?
If it were raining out, I would, but since it isn't, I'd like to get out and enjoy some of the day. I won't. Thank you.
You're welcome. Question is, are you ready for the question? Mr. Sprite.
Actually, I would like to second Spoon's amendment after he makes it.
Mr. Agave.
Spoon, Agave, District 3. I would like to motion that we increase the services, the human services budget by $52,000. That's approximately 40%.
Is there a second?
Yes.
Mr. Sprite.
I heard Spoon's proposal earlier in the information meeting, and I thought his words were very wise. We are at a time where increasing that budget would be absolutely appropriate. The needs have increased far more than we're likely to increase it here today, so it would still be a token gesture. But given the other kinds of things that we are willing to spend extra money on, I think this is certainly clearly a need of the town and those people who have been, on behalf of several people who've spoken of today in our discussion as pay-as-you-throw, and this is a really good way to reach some of those most needy, many of whom live under my roofs, and many others in my neighborhood.
Question is, shall you amend Article 13 as recommended by Mr. Agave? Mr. Agave?
The amount of $52,000 is an amount I chose simply because it is reasonably substantial and would be effective, as opposed to a small amount which really wouldn't amount to anything. As you have all heard at the informational meeting and again here, I feel that this amount is very small. It's $1 a week or something on your tax rolls. Compared, when I think of the things we spend money on, I think the repairs at the park will end up over $200,000 with interest on the loan. And when I compare that to the sum that I'm asking for here, it seems like $52,000 is a pittance. I look at the list of the services that are on this list, and I look at the numbers of people in our community that are assisted by all of these services. When I consider that the state is always losing money and a lot of these organizations will see smaller and smaller allocations from the state, and I think overall that since it is as a representative of the community, and again recognizing that a large part of the community is underrepresented here, and because I have asked for the responsibility to represent them, I will. And I understand, I recognize that there is a committee that worked hard. They made a decision to abide by a town recommendation to level fund their requests, and they did so. But that I felt like what they were responding to was a request from the town, and I felt that they should have been more concerned with the needs of the people that are served by all of these organizations. Even an amount of $52,000 seems awfully small for what we really need. Overall, what I am appealing to is everybody's sense of a community. And I think very, very importantly, in hard times, and we are entering hard times, and they will get harder, what a community does is pull together and take care of those that most need help. And that's my appeal, and I hope that everybody accepts this. Thank you.
Question is, shall you amend Article 13 as recommended by Mr. Agave? Mr. DeGray.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Agave talked about level funding the human service budget. The Select Board is not part of those discussions, nor do they direct the committee as to what it should do. That committee is actually governed by our charter, and our charter says that it can be up to, I think, 2% of our general fund budget. That committee has put in long and difficult hours in certainly understanding need in our community, also looking at the burden that we've heard a lot about today about our tax rolls. You know, we just kind of run around this track. And so as much as I would like to support that, I'm going to vote against your amendment. And I would like to take a moment to thank the committee for a thankless and most difficult job of serving on that committee. And thank you for taking it away from me as a Select Board person.
The question is, shall you amend Article 13 as recommended by Mr. Agave? Ms. Darling?
Ann Darling, District 2, and I am a member of the Human Services Committee, and I'm going to speak for us. We appreciate the support that town meeting has consistently extended to Brattleboro residents who need the support of human services agencies. And we definitely agree with Spoon that meeting human needs should remain a high priority for this town. Otherwise, we wouldn't spend all those long hours that we did to review applications and make these recommendations to you. We have tried to balance the needs of those served by the nonprofits with the need of taxpayers to keep the budget under control. And we work hard, very hard, so that you will feel assured that your money is well spent with fiscally sound organizations and that it benefits Brattleboro residents. We see it as our job to keep the bottom line for this article within reasonable limits. Our take on what is reasonable may not coincide with what the majority of us think, and that is why, as a committee, we don't feel it's our place to take a stand on this amendment one way or the other, but that we should all decide. We do want you to know that if town meeting votes to amend our recommendation, we will happily reconvene and allocate any additional funds.
Question is, shall you amend Article 13 as recommended by Mr. Agave, which is to increase the appropriation by $52,000? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor of the amendment, kindly rise and remain standing. Those opposed, kindly rise and remain standing. It appears that the amendment has been defeated. The recurring question is, shall you adopt Article 13? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor kindly rise and remain standing. Those opposed kindly rise and remain standing. The article has been adopted. Article 14. To see if the town of Brattleboro will appropriate out of the fund balance the sum of money not to exceed $20,000 for the purpose of funding a recycle coordinator position for a period not to exceed 1 year. Mr. DeGray.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and you are doing one heck of a job. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I, like you, are in mourning because Georgetown lost the other day. I move that the town appropriate out of the fund balance $20,000 for the purpose of funding a recycling coordinator position for a period not to exceed 1 year.
Is there a second? Motion has been made and seconded that the town appropriate out of fund balance $20,000 for the purpose of funding a recycling coordinator position for a period not to exceed 1 year. Mr. DeGray.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm going to defer to Sarah Edwards, who has an amendment here, and just to let the body know why we're doing it here. This is, there's much more clarity here for us, for the auditors to follow the action that's going to be recommended. So I would defer to Sarah Edwards at this point.
Mr. DeGray yields to Mrs. Edwards. Mrs. Edwards.
Mr. Moderator, I move to amend Article 14 to see if the town of Brattleboro will appropriate out of the fund balance an increase to $190,000, $40,000 of which will go to the hiring of a contract recycling coordinator, and up to $150,000 to go toward the purchase of bags.
Motion has been made and seconded. Do we have a copy of that? Okay. This is off my memory. We amend the article to appropriate out of the fund balance a sum not to exceed $190,000, of which $40,000 will be for the purpose of hiring a recycled coordinator for a period, a recycling coordinator. Okay, thanks. Okay. Let me start from the beginning here. I move to amend, she moves to amend Article 14 to see if the town of Brattleboro will appropriate out of the fund balance an increase to $190,000, $40,000 of which will go to the hiring of a contract recycling coordinator, and up to $150,000 to go toward the purchase of bags. Ms. Evers, do you wish to say anything further? No, Mr. Moderator, I think it's discussion. Okay. Mr. Wheelock.
Marshall Wheelock, District 2. Would you accept a friendly amendment to separate the two amounts, the $40,000 and the $150,000?
I think it is separated.
No. The way it is now, we'd be voting on both amounts simultaneously.
Oh, you want to vote separately? Okay.
Yes.
Any objection to that?
No.
Any objection from you, Ms. Edwards? Okay. When we vote, we'll vote on this article of amendment. First on the appropriation of 40, And then secondly, the appropriation of $150,000.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any further questions? Mr. Dimes.
My name is Kurt Dimes, District 2. I move for another amendment. This is an amendment to Article 14.
Well, Mr. Dimes, I think it would make it simpler if we vote on the two pending amendments we have.
Oh.
Then we'll take up, I'd rather not get into amendments to amendments.
I understand.
Okay? So the question is, are you ready for the question, Mr. Phillips?
So this isn't an amendment, Steve Phillips, District 3, but it's aimed at one. And I thought that the purpose was not only to purchase up to $150,000 in bags, but also to distribute them to the residents without cost under a pay-as-you-throw program. Because to purchase an extra $150,000 of bags just shifts the cost of the budget. I think we're talking about distributing them. No. So you're just going to spend $150,000 more? With cost or without cost? Okay.
Well,
yeah, so
yes, Mr. Everett? Right, but Mr. Yeah. We're talking really about the 40,000, but Mr. Phillips, Mr. Phillips does raise a question as to the second amendment, as to the purpose, because I think there was some discussion that that money was for the purchase of 150,000 bags for distribution to people of Brattleboro without needs assessment. Is that?
Without the purchase of 150,000 bags, without the distinction of people felt that they couldn't afford bags or wanted to go in and get a free bag, they could go in and get a bag.
Yeah.
Doesn't address distribution, where we drop them off, or at this point, it's for the purchase of up to $150,000 worth of bags. We may not need that much, that's why we're saying up to.
when we get to it, I'd just like to include that in.
Okay. All right. Right now, we're talking about solely the amendment to include $40,000 for the hiring of a contract recycling coordinator. Mr. Barber.
Thanks, Mr. Moderator. I think we're talking about the coordinator. Okay, so this is the beginning of the development of our system. The coordinator, in my mind, is going to help the town figure out whether it's got to spend this $150,000 and how to distribute or allocate the bags to homeowners. That's part of our system. And so we're starting at the right end. We're going to hire somebody to do this.
Question is on the amendment as proposed by Ms. Edwards. Mrs. Ekstrom?
Hi, I'm Ellen Engstrom, District 3. I feel really uncomfortable about these amendments, and the reason is that I don't think this is a good place to develop our strategy for recycling. And that is essentially what we're doing. We're having a great big discussion about how we're going to proceed, and it's happening very fast, and the consequences of the decisions we make today are not clear to me, maybe to the rest of you, but not to me. And I think, you know, one of my big problems with the pay-as-you-throw or recycling as a general practice or need is the strategy of how it's going to get done. In other words, the devil is in the details, and we're kind of sitting here figuring out the details as we go along. I don't think that's a good idea. I think when we actually implement a recycling plan, we have to be clear about the strategy, and that has to be communicated very clearly to all the residents of the community. And it has to focus on it has to be a very communitarian approach to it, and it also has to be, we also have to take into account, you know, how we can reward people for small steps as well as, you know, big ones, because, and I just don't see that coming together here, and I'm not going to support these amendments because of that reason. Thank you.
Question is on the First Amendment. Mr. Beatty?
This town has an excellent solid waste subcommittee. If this paid coordinator works with that committee, we have a good chance of beginning to develop a really good program in this town. If we don't, the same thing will happen, you know, this year that happened last year, nothing. So this is vital to do. We have a good chance of saving a lot of money by having this paid coordinator. There's significant programs and things we can do in this town to reduce the waste stream. We need a paid coordinator to help us do it. I think we would be foolish to not do this. Thank you.
Question is on the amendment. Mr. Sprague?
Bertie Sprague, District 2. I'm very unclear as to what the responsibilities of this coordinator will be. Will it be program development? Will it be policing the trash stream? You know, what will it be? So I'd like to hear people's thoughts on that before I vote on it.
A member of the committee, Town Manager Sundag.
Thank you. The recycling coordinator position, well, again, because it's a new program, it's going to be okay. This position is going to be, because we don't have an actual program in place, it's going to be developed as we're going along. But the general, first of all, to explain first what the position would not be doing. What the position wouldn't be doing is taking care of the distribution of bags to the stores at which the bags are sold. We have put out the RFP that went out, and the company that we will be choosing would actually be doing the direct distribution to the stores. Okay, so and that's part of the administration of the bags. Stores would order directly from the manufacturer of the bags, and then the bags would be distributed directly to the stores. Now, with that in mind, so that's what they would not be doing that type of work. Okay, work that they would be doing would be more of, they would be doing some of the education, because we're going to have to do an education program on instructing people on, you know, what is a pay-as-you-throw system, where do you purchase bags, how are bags purchased, when is this starting. There's going to have to be quite a bit of community outreach so that there are people understand. We're also going to have to work so that people understand who does this affect, who is this impacting, who is it not impacting. That sometimes gets confusing for people. With that, then, we would also be, this position would also be working to identify the procedures and the processes for if there are bags to be given out free. We'd have to develop that process and that system. We would have to develop a more formal system for assessing the pay-as-you-throw program. You know, we're going to have to be looking at, are the bag rates set at an appropriate rate? You know, what is our tonnage? What is our recycling? We're going to be needing to monitor those figures and those calculations. We're going to be needing to look at the illegal dumping issue. We are going to be you know, it's going to take someone to probably, you know, the Solid Waste Committee during their looking into this program, they rode the trucks. They rode the trucks with Triple T. So they got a sense of the areas. They got a sense of where are people recycling, where are people not recycling. Because you do see it, and you do, I mean, I know myself, just on recycle days, you can tell. There's some days, some places there's recycle out, you know, every other week. Other places, there's one house on a street where you see the recycling. They're going to have to get more familiar with those types of things. More than that, then, what we're really looking for is someone to establish a system that they can then hand over to the town, okay? Because this is not a position that we see. It's being funded out of fund balance. If it's a position not to exceed a year. So what they're developing are the policies and the procedures that will then be handed off to existing staff, and working with existing staff on ensuring then that whatever is created is maintained. So they'll be working on the basically, you can do it. We're going to have to be, devil is in the details. We're going to have to be looking at what are the actual details of the program. We've not entered into a contract with a manufacturer yet. We will be doing that. We're going to have to be working with the stores. So we're going to be setting up the system. We're going to then be implementing the system, and then we're going to be ensuring that we have a system in place that can be handed off to existing staff.
Question is on the first proposal of amendment, Mr. Underhill.